Hello, chapter 22 today of Letters from the Lighthouse. Today's chapter title was an American propaganda slogan, and it was designed to boost production at work and at home of ordinary people. The chapter title is May You Never Know What It Means to Be a Refugee. The poster itself had many more words and read like this. This is everybody's war. The enemy has made it so. May you never know what it means to be a refugee, to be hungry, to be homeless. Be sure this never happens to you. So, chapter 22, may you never know what it means to be a refugee. What happened next, almost next, I can only describe as miraculous. Esther Worth had an idea that didn't involve her big mouth or her fists. Instead, it called for sewing. I confess I was so taken aback I had to ask her to repeat it when she told me. When you said about telling my story, she said, it got me thinking. We were at the Lighthouse having tea. When I'd invited her, Esther had shrugged and said, why not? Quite casually. Yet once she saw the lighthouse ladder we had to climb and the lovely rooms inside, her whole face lit up into the hugest of smiles. She was a dab hand at making toast too. We ate a big pile of it topped with Ephraim's crab-apple jam and made Pixie beg for the crusts. It was the nicest tea I'd had in ages. We'll ask if we can borrow the refugees' coats tomorrow, Esther explained, wiping crumbs from her mouth. What for? You've seen the badges? She meant the yellow stars with Jude on them, which meant Jew in German. They left in such a hurry some people didn't get the chance to remove them, and it's time they came off. And I've got an idea who's going to do it. The next morning, being a school day, meant we'd find the local kids in class. Bright and early, we visited all the refugees, rounding up more coats than we could sensibly carry. By the time we reached school, my arms were ready to drop off, but we kept going until we arrived at the classroom door. Well, what now? I asked Esther, since neither of us had a free hand to knock. Esther did that one thing Mum said girls should never do. She winked. Then, pushing down with her elbow on the handle, she managed to open the door. Mrs. Simmons, the teacher, shrieked in surprise. Good gracious! It must have been a bit of a shock, to be fair. We were little more than two enormous piles of coats, with legs sticking out at the bottom. Unable to hold on to mine any more, I placed them as gently as I could on the floor. Straightening up again, I got my first full view of the class. 20 Budmouth Point kids staring right back at us. My mouth turned dry. Without really meaning to, I edged nearer to the door. Esther had no such qualms. Only this time, instead of squaring up to the local children, she laid out her father's coat on the front desk. I don't know what you think you're doing, Miss Simmons said shrilly, but you're not doing it in my classroom. Taking Esther's arm, she tried steering her towards the exit. Esther dug her heels in and I blocked the way. Thinking it all very good entertainment, the Budmouth kids started slow clapping and cheering. Already we were more interesting than their geometry lesson, and we hadn't yet said a word. At the second attempt, Esther managed to display the coat properly, holding it by the shoulders so everyone got a good view of the yellow star. I'm going to fetch the headmaster, Mrs. Simmons spluttered, but didn't leave the room. Bit by bit, the noise died away. The pupils began to look quite intrigued. Some sat forward, chins in hands. You could see the mockery still lingering in their faces, like they were waiting for something to make fun of. But as Esther explained the yellow stars and what they meant, their expressions changed. It was like watching newspaper catch light when you made a fire. Once it took hold, the flames began to spread and glow. At last, the class was starting to understand. This was someone their age, who they sort of knew, explaining what prejudice felt like from the other side. That horrible sense that if people were your enemy, it meant they didn't feel, they didn't breathe, didn't think like you did. Really, they were hardly proper people at all. So it was all right to drop bombs and destroy people's lives or treat them no better than animals. Except it wasn't. The mood grew ever more sombre. By the time Esther finished talking, a few pupils were wiping their eyes. The rest of the class looked stunned. "Thank you for listening," Esther said, her chin held high. I was close enough to see the tiniest tremble in her bottom lip, and it made me think of her as even more magnificent. It was Mrs. Simmons who moved first. Opening a cupboard at the side of the room and bringing out half a dozen sewing tins. "Right, class," she said, all shrill again. "Take a coat from each of the piles. Unpick the stars carefully. No snagging of the fabric, please. These are people's best coats, remember." Within moments the room was noisy again, only this time with a buzz of activity. Every pupil had a coat spread in front of them on their desks. Some people got straight on with the task. Others took a moment to look at the garment, as if it was a person that they were meeting for the first time. One boy, I noticed, lifted a sleeve to his nose and sniffed it. Another fastened the buttons and tidied the lapels. The lapels are these bits of a coat, the sort of folded over bits. Of the 2 coats left, I took one over to a spare desk and sat down. This coat was knee-length with a belt at the waist. It smelt of face powder and the sea, made of grey wool with tiny red flecks in it. Its buttons were shaped like budding roses, and I'd a feeling I'd seen Frau Berliner wearing it. With a few snips, the star came off. After I smoothed away any trace of stitch marks of the fabric, it was once again just a coat, a lovely, elegant coat. All it told the world about Frau Berliner was that she had excellent taste. It didn't take long to remove all the stars. "What do we do with them now?" a boy at the front asked. Mrs. Simmons gestured to the coal stove that burned in the corner of the classroom, but Esther shook her head. "Can everyone put their star into the pocket of the coat they removed it from, please?" Mrs. Simmons looked confused. "Can't we throw them away?" "They're not yours to get rid of," Esther replied firmly. "What happens to each of those stars now is entirely up to the person who had to wear it." She was right. Those stars were other people's stories, not ours. Then we had the task of delivering a huge heap of coats back to their owners. Returning them was much easier, mind you, because the whole class came with us to help. It didn't change everything, not straight away. 20 pupils unpicking yellow stars was just the beginning. Yet on my way home from school that afternoon, Mrs. Moore came out of her bakery to speak to me. "I've been hearing all about you," she said rather mysteriously. "You and your friend were very brave, taking on the class like that. Bravo to both of you." At school the next day, I told Esther. It was break time and we were sharing the jam sandwiches Ephraim insisted on putting in my satchel. "Has anyone started speaking to you in the street?" I asked. "The street?" She laughed, almost choking on a sandwich, so I had to thump her on the back. "They've been queuing up to meet Papa. Everyone heard how he saved Cliff's life and how people are coming from the next village. Someone this morning even brought him their cat." I looked at her in amazement, especially when she told me the cat's owner was Mrs. Wilcox, the farmer. "We need another idea now," I said eagerly. "Removing the stars made people think, but we have to build on it, bring people together." Esther finished it for me. "Well, we bonded over jam sandwiches," I said, holding up the empty paper wrapper. Esther grinned. And just like that, she had another brilliant plan, though I like to think Ephraim's sandwiches helped too. Esther's idea was to hold a tea party. So working together at Queenie's kitchen table, we designed invitations on whatever scraps of card we could find. These we then delivered to all the villagers and the refugees, also asking them to bring cake or sandwiches to share. The party was to take place that Sunday afternoon. By chance, it fell on the same day Cliff was due to leave hospital, which was brilliant because I knew he'd not want to miss it for the world. Do you remember how greedy he is with food, how much he loves his food? All morning we set up tables in the village hall with some of Budmouth kids coming to help. Boys called John, Clive, Arthur and 2 girls, Gillian and Pamela. They brought snowdrops and early primroses which we put in jugs and white cloths that made the tables look smart. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson and Miss Carter hung up a huge banner on the wall which said, "Welcome to Budmouth Point." I kept listening out for the Plymouth bus until Miss Henderson said it didn't come until after 3:30. Though I couldn't wait to see Mum and Cliff, I also knew that being together would make us notice who was missing. There was still no news on Zuki. Not even a sighting. Maybe I was being oversensitive, but Miss Carter's cheerful reassurance was starting to sound rather strained. At 3 o'clock, the guests began arriving. I shook hands with Jim, the cabbage man, and Mr. Barrowman as they came in. I said hello to people whose names I still didn't know and had a quick cuddle with the baby Reuben, whose mum had brought him along. Thanked everyone who had come with plates of food, which I took and put on the white cloth tables. In fact, I smiled so much it made my face ache. I don't know if you've ever had that when you've had such a brilliant day somewhere that your cheeks really start hurting by the end of the day. As more of the refugees arrived, the Budmouth kids started whispering with interest. Pamela said to Gillian, "That's the coat I unpicked," and nodded at Mr. Schumann. "That's mine," Gillian replied, and she was pointing at Fraulein Weber. Giggling shyly, she went over to say hello. Esther was busy showing people where to hang their things. "You all right?" I asked as we passed each other. She puffed out her cheeks. "It's hard work being nice, isn't it?" You could see that she was loving every minute. Even in our wildest dreams, we hadn't expected so many people to come. There had been over 100 people from Budmouth Point alone. And though the Austrians hovered a little tentatively around the edges still, Dr. Worth couldn't move for adoration. I wouldn't have put it past Ephraim not to come at all, so I was awfully glad when he arrived. He made quite an effort too, wearing a smart grey suit and carrying a tin of homemade carrot fudge. Carrot fudge? We'll have to look that one up, won't we? He'd even tied a red ribbon around Pixie's neck. It crossed my mind he was hoping on this big occasion that Zuki might miraculously appear, like people did in stories and at the end of films. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking on my part. I was about to tell him how nice he looked when Pixie barked. In a scrabble of paws, she shot off across the room to greet someone she knew who was coming in the door. The person was wearing short trousers that didn't cover his scabby knees, and my heart leaped because it was Cliff. I rushed over at once to give him a hug, though it was hard to with Pixie squirming at his feet. "Oh, careful," Cliff winced. "Mind my stitches." "Hello, darling," Mum kissed me. "He's tired, so we won't stay long." "I am here, you know," Cliff remarked, grinning cheekily. He looked 1,000,000 times better than when I'd last seen him, but was still very thin in the face. Once we'd got him comfortable in a chair with Pixie at his feet, Mum went in search of tea. "Do you want to see my scar?" Cliff asked the minute she was gone. I nodded eagerly. Without a flicker of embarrassment, he untucked his shirt to show me the 4-inch purple scar between his right hip and belly button, crisscrossed with thread where the stitches were still in. "Cool," I gasped. "That's the wasp's ankles." "Isn't it?" Cliff looked extremely chuffed. Unfortunately, the hospital hadn't let him bring home his appendix in a pot, so he said, but it was all right because he could make his scar pull faces. "Watch this, look," he said. We were still laughing when Mum returned with 2 cups of tea. "Olive, love, Miss Henderson is asking if you'll pop down the road and fetch Queenie. She seems to have forgotten what the time is." "Her clocks are always stopped, that's why," Cliff explained. "And they all say the same time." "Still?" I asked. "Last I heard, Dr. Worth was trying to fix them. Maybe she doesn't want them working again." Mum looked surprised. "Why ever not?" Then, as if the answer had come to her, her face paled. Oh dear, the poor thing." "It's all right," Cliff replied. "They're not very nice clocks." But somehow I didn't think that was what Mum meant. That's the end of the chapter. Before I read the next one, see if you can work out for yourselves why Esther has all her clocks stopped on the same time. I think in the next chapter will tell us why. All right, see you next time. Bye-bye.